Any leadership that teaches you to depend upon another race is a leadership that will enslave you. Any leadership that teaches you to depend upon another race is a leadership that will enslave you. But we have decided to find a leadership of our own to make ourselves free men. If you cannot do what other men have done, what other nations have done, what other races have done, then you have better die. Can we do it? We can do it. We shall do it.
Citizens of the United States expect the government to provide everyone, regardless of their gender, race, or religion, with certain inalienable rights. However, there was once a time in America's relatively recent history when many minority groups were not entitled to such rights. African Americans had an especially difficult time obtaining the rights that were guaranteed to them in the 14th and 15th Amendments. Although slavery was formally abolished through the passage of the 13th Amendment, African Americans struggled to fully assimilate into American society in the decades that followed. The American Colonization Society was founded in 1816 by Presbyterian minister Robert Finley in order to establish a homeland in Africa for the purpose of colonizing freed American slaves. At the time, slaves were beginning to be set free by their owners in the North and some in the South. The ACS had witnessed the immense discrimination and prejudice that freed blacks were subjected to and came to the conclusion that they would never be able to fully assimilate into American society. The ACS and those who supported it believed it was the government's responsibility to send freed blacks to a homeland in Africa since they failed to provide them with any rights in their own country. When the ACS was first established, every sect of the United States seemed to support its plan. Some African Americans supported the ACS's plan. However, the vast majority of freedmen did not.
The American Colonization Society was one of the organizations that we would loosely consider to be an abolitionist organization. It was certainly fueled by abolitionist sentiment, and many of the same people who we indeed would consider to be abolitionists were involved in the founding of the society.
Though it was of some importance prior to the Civil War, the ACS's popularity among the American public diminished in the few years following the end of the war. However, as plans for Reconstruction began to be drafted, the now larger number of freed blacks faced more discrimination and prejudice than ever. Blacks were already guaranteed certain rights in the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments, but the government failed to support them. Liberia, meaning Land of Liberty, was the African homeland established by freed blacks working in coalition with the United States government in order to settle freed blacks outside of the United States. Liberia was formally established in the year 1820 as a small nation located on the western coast of Africa. Blacks began to arrive by the thousands in Liberia in the years following the first settlement in 1820. Marcus Garvey was a pivotal and extremely influential figure in the course of the Back to Africa movement. Garvey was born in Kingston, Jamaica in 1887. After leading an unsuccessful strike as a teenager, Garvey was forced to leave his home country of Jamaica. He traveled to areas in South and Central America, including the island of Costa Rica, Peru, and Panama. Through his various travels, Garvey witnessed firsthand the harsh struggles endured by working-class blacks. In 1914, Garvey established the Universal Negro Improvement and Conservation Association and African Communities League, also known as the UNIA. His purpose for creating the UNIA was to promote black nationalism and an independent African nationality. Garvey dreamt of a single nation consisting solely of those of African descent, and where they would be able to govern themselves and where they would be completely liberated. Garvey was eventually noticed by W.E. Du Bois and other influential black activists. Though Garvey was praised by Du Bois and other such activists, he did not support their viewpoints. Garvey believed that activists such as Du Bois relied too heavily on the support and the acceptance of the white American majority. Additionally, activists such as Du Bois supported the idea of blacks and whites living together in unity, while Garvey believed that a racially pure black society would be a better environment for African Americans to thrive. Garvey next embarked on a tour of 38 U.S. states in order to view firsthand the living conditions of African Americans. During his travels, Garvey observed that many African Americans were beginning to give up on their hopes of gaining rights equal to those attained by white men. They had been living in inferior conditions for so long that it became what they were used to. While he had expected racial tensions to lessen following the end of World War I, the war in which African American soldiers had played a pivotal part in winning, Garvey noted that discrimination and race riots rather seemed to be heightening. It was at this point that Garvey decided that colonization was the way in which blacks would obtain proper rights. While traveling from state to state, Garvey began to spread his message on a larger scale and encouraged many African Americans to be proud of their heritage in order to preserve their rights. He spread his message of black economic independence and black pride in order to encourage blacks to relocate to a purely black colony in Africa.
The reason why Marcus Garvey is more successful than the ACS in the century before him was because this was a black-led movement. It was organized by Garvey and the Garveyites. They felt more ownership over it. They felt more invested in it.
More than anything else, the issue of pride around blackness is what Garvey is tapping into. The rank and file, the workaday people who would never get noticed or recognized, nurses, and various sort of like the masses, but who are unknown.
By 1919, Garvey's UNIA had gained almost 2 million members. Additionally, Garvey established the Black Star Line in 1919. Black Star Line was originally created in order to provide a system through which blacks on all continents could travel and trade. It was a steamship company operated solely by African Americans. Garvey utilized his Black Star Line in order to transport black Americans hoping to settle in Liberia. Though many trips using the line ended up being unsuccessful, Garvey managed to help colonize a large majority of the 15,000 African Americans sent to Liberia during the Back to Africa movement span. Despite his successes in the realm of sending black Americans to Liberia, many failures began to come Garvey's way in the years that followed 1920. His Black Star Line was dissolved in 1922 due to the fact that it was financially unstable and could not afford to operate any longer, although it was a nationalist symbol to many African Americans. However, later that year, the view of Garvey by many African Americans began to shift dramatically for the worse. Garvey had met briefly with the Ku Klux Klan and suggested that the two were similar in the fact that they were both racial supremacist groups. After finding out about this meeting, many African Americans withdrew their support for Garvey. Garvey was convicted of mail fraud in relation to his Black Star Line in 1922. Following his bail on the request of the president, Garvey traveled back to Jamaica in hopes of relaunching the UNIA. Unfortunately, there were not many supporters of his association there, and the UNIA was never again relaunched. Despite his many downfalls, Marcus Garvey led a life filled with various successes. His program and his words inspired more African Americans in the 1920s and later than those of any other African American leader. A powerful orator, Garvey's widespread message of pride and self-help resonated long after his death and as well as the end of the UNIA and the Back to Africa movement. His words and actions challenged America's deeply and long-held racist beliefs to the core. Garvey knew how to win over the masses and remains until this day one of the most influential figures to have made a difference in the history of African American independence. Following Marcus Garvey's death, the Back to Africa movement had reached the near end of its span. However, Garvey's actions and programs helped to spark a renewed interest in the African continent. Additionally, Garvey helped to influence those such as Father Divine, the founder and leader of the International Mission Peace Movement, and Malcolm X, an African-American Muslim minister and human rights activist. Despite the Back to Africa movement's various pitfalls and successes, without it, the African Americans' journey to liberty is likely to have been vastly different. Without leaders and organizations such as Marcus Garvey and the ACS to point out the rights that blacks did not receive but were promised under certain constitutional amendments, the road to black independence may have been inhibited or may not have begun in the first place.